Hello, and welcome to the Things I Want My Daughters to Know podcast, the podcast redefining women's health, one unfiltered conversation at a time. I'm your host, Jacqueline Rose, and every week I'll sit down with leading women's health experts and real women to share their lived experiences, bust health myths, challenge outdated and uninformed narratives, and explore what's really possible for women. We'll talk about periods, fertility, menopause, hormones, aging, and everything in between. This podcast is for every woman who ever felt confused, dismissed, or left out of the conversation about her own health. It is a space to celebrate women, break the silence, and open up conversations between mothers, daughters, sisters, and friends. Please hit the follow or subscribe button so you don't miss an episode, and share this podcast with your daughters, family, and friends. Let's get on with the episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Things I Want My Daughters to Know podcast. And today I am super excited. I am joined by another podcast host, although that is not the only thing she does. Sonya is going to share with us so many interesting things, especially bringing an Australian voice to the menopause conversation. And I am really, really excited, a little bit starstruck because I've listened to Sonya's podcast, Dear Menopause, for quite a while. So this is a meeting of two podcast hosts, and I'm so excited to have her here. Sonya, welcome to this podcast, and tell us a little bit who you are, what you do, and we'll get into our conversation.
Oh, amazing. What a beautiful welcome. That was amazing. Jacqueline, thank you so much for inviting me to chat on your podcast. I'm really excited to join you today. I love connecting with other podcast hosts, particularly podcast hosts that have been listeners of my show as well. That's just such a, beautiful combination of synergies. And, these are some of my favorite conversations. So thank you for inviting me. I am, as you said, I'm a podcast host. I've been hosting the Dear Menopause podcast for over 3 years now. I do a lot of public speaking. I am a fierce advocate and a little bit of an activist. And I'm in the throes of working on writing my first book, actually. So, I have a lot going on.
Amazing. So tell us how you got into this menopause sphere. We know it's relatively new.
Mhm.
And as you said, you've been doing the podcast for 3 years. So you were definitely one of those early sort of pioneers talking about menopause in this space. Tell us what brought you here and sort of how you arrived at this place.
Yeah, sure. So, sadly for me, which was a little bit different to most women, I arrived at my menopause through a cancer diagnosis. So, I was diagnosed with breast cancer when I was 47. Total curveball in my very fit, very healthy, very active, very
Yeah.
happy life. Now, in retrospect, obviously, I know that I was in my perimenopause years. However, I had not experienced a single symptom of perimenopause up until that point in time. My periods were as regular as clockwork. I
Yeah.
was still sleeping like, they everyone says sleeping like a baby, which to me does not make sense because let's all
No.
be honest, babies do not sleep well. But I slept really, really well. And yeah, I had no issues until I had this curveball breast cancer diagnosis,
Yeah.
which, my treatment plan for that was radical. I had surgery, I had chemotherapy, I had radiotherapy, and then I also took adjuvant therapy for a period of time afterwards. And it was the chemotherapy that literally thrust me into what
Yeah.
they call a medically induced menopause.
Yeah.
So I didn't experience that kind of roller coaster transitional, hormone chaos that so many women do.
Yeah.
But I did experience incredibly severe symptoms when they did kick in,
Yeah.
and they happen very, very quickly. It's very
Yeah.
abrupt, and it's obviously also very layered with a cancer diagnosis and trauma and a whole lot of other stuff that's going on in your life at the same time. But my symptoms from a menopause perspective were very extreme.
Okay. Two questions, or first one statement and then one question. I love that you talk about the fact that at 47,
until your cancer diagnosis, you had no symptoms. You were happily going on probably a perimenopause journey, because we know, according to
Mm,
that, your age, you were probably in perimenopause, and that we don't talk enough about those asymptomatic or non-symptomatic perimenopause experience. We need to be talking about that more. Unfortunately, or for fortunately, your menopause, your deep, profound work in the menopause space was because of this diagnosis.
yeah.
I just want us to acknowledge that you had no symptoms until then. And, we don't know what would have happened otherwise, but maybe had you never received your cancer diagnosis, you would have happily navigated perimenopause, menopause with very, very few symptoms. And I just want women to know, and I know that you agree on this, that you can be a very happy, very confident perimenopausal woman without symptoms. And I just want to give that space. I
Yeah,
know
yeah.
that your journey then
And
went,
it's really important.
yeah,
Can I ask a quick question? Do you
oh,
edit these?
no.
No. Okay, cool. I am going to be very open and honest here with everyone. I have a dog in the room with me who, until five
Okay.
minutes ago, was sound asleep on the bed. He has now jumped up and has the squeakiest toy in history. So I'm just going to gently reach down and take that off him, and we can go back to recording.
I have often been seen recording with my arm throwing with some toy for my dog to get him out, get her out of the way. So it's all good.
I know. I'm so sorry.
All good.
Okay, but this is what we do. We keep it real.
Yeah.
So yeah, look, we will never know, but there is every chance that I could have been one of that 20% of the women that do transition through with very, very little disruption. And, I agree with you that we talk, so much as we do need to. We need to raise
Yes.
awareness. We need to bring, a real case forward for those that do struggle and have significant challenges, but there always will be a percentage of women that don't. And,
Yeah.
it's just as important to acknowledge their journey as
Yeah.
well.
Okay. And my second question to you was, and this will take us on to sort of your next piece of the conversation, is how prepared were you following your surgical menopause for what was about to happen? How did your doctors prepare you or not?
Or
And
not.
yeah, exactly. I knew that was coming, but I was laying the groundwork for the audience, giving the benefit of the doubt, because I know that so many women are not prepared. It's like, yes, you need this procedure. It's a critical procedure to ensure, good treatment of your cancer diagnosis.
Yeah.
But then that next piece of the conversation, and therefore you will be put into surgical menopause, is sort of ignored, because the most important
Yeah.
thing is that you are alive and healthy and well. So tell
Yeah.
us what happened once surgical menopause, once you hit surgical menopause.
Yeah, so backstepping just a touch. So I literally had a one sentence conversation with my medical oncologist at our very first meeting,
Yeah.
where he said to me, given your closeness in age to what is likely to be your age of menopause, so average age of menopause being 51, I was 47. He's like, you'll probably go into menopause. And I'm pretty sure that I just nodded dumbly and went, okay, cool, thanks. And
Yeah, because
that
you're
was
thinking about
literally.
other things. You're obviously thinking
Well, and
about,
it didn't mean a lot to me either. It was just like, oh, okay, cool, sure, done. Like, I didn't know what to expect from menopause other than no more periods, really. That was it. I didn't know about the hormonal fluctuations. I didn't know about the chaos that could be caused. So it really was just a very innocuous moment of him delivering one sentence and me going, okay, cool, moving on to the next subject. So then when I did start experiencing some really severe symptoms, and for me, the most immediate were I had the most horrendous night sweats. So I would get hot flushes during the day, but then at night I would just have these horrible night sweats where I would wake up in the middle of the night literally as if I had just stepped out of the shower, drenched in cold sweat.
Yeah.
My bedding would all have been wet through. I would have to wake my husband up so we could change the bedding, which is embarrassing. I didn't
Mm.
understand what was going on. That was probably my first really severe symptom that I had to kind of really workshop my
Yeah.
way through. And then, flowing on from that came the cognitive challenges. I lost a lot of my words. So I was very, and am again, thankfully, very verbally fluent, that I really, really, really struggled with. I
Yeah.
couldn't string two sentences together without forgetting a number of words
Yeah.
within those sentences. I had significant body aches and pains. I had severe vaginal dryness. I got skin rashes. I put on weight. I mean, that for me, it's also unpeeling and unpicking what was a side effect of chemotherapy and my
Yes. Yes.
treatment. So it
Yes.
is a little bit more complicated. But
Yeah.
once we were able to put aside, well, these things were from treatment, everything that I was left with was kind of like, okay, well, these are obviously the menopause symptoms. Yeah, so it was really hard, and it took
Yeah.
me a long time to unpick all of that. And I
Yeah.
didn't have a lot of help from doctors or support from doctors. When you're going through your treatment, as you so rightly said, everybody's prime focus is keeping you alive and keeping you
Yeah.
healthy and ensuring you're going to be around for the next 40, 50 years.
Yeah.
And there's very little focus on what you're struggling with right now
Yeah.
outside of treatment.
Yeah.
So I was very unsupported. I was very unprepared because nobody sat me down and said, okay, they kind of told me what to expect from the side effects from the chemo and the radiotherapy, but there was
Yeah.
no support, no hand holding, no explaining what the menopause would
Yeah.
mean.
Yeah.
And, that really left me very isolated. It left me very alone, playing detective at a time where I was trying to pick up the pieces of my life and
Yeah.
work out what my life was going to look like moving forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was hard. It was
Yeah.
really, really hard. And all of that at the end of the day is what brought me to do what I do today.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. Look, I do know that some doctors, some women who go through either medical menopause or surgically induced menopause, there are some women who are handed their HRT the next day, and for some women it is fine. But I
Mm.
think there are too many women who have your experience, and I think we
Yeah,
need
so
to
the
talk
difference
about it.
there, yeah, and if you don't mind me just explaining a little bit of the
Please.
difference there is. So when you say a surgical menopause and they're handed HRT kind of the next day, that is most likely a scenario where somebody has gone in and had a hysterectomy. They've perhaps had their ovaries removed, or most
Yes.
likely had their ovaries removed, and an oophorectomy as well, so fallopian tubes. So that kind of full hysterectomy. And then they're not, that could be a risk reducing surgery for a multiple of reasons. It doesn't necessarily mean it came from a cancer diagnosis.
Yes.
So those women are absolutely should always be put onto HRT immediately.
Yeah.
For someone like myself, where it is a
Yes.
medically
Medical.
induced menopause, so it's
Yes.
actually brought on as a result of cancer treatment,
Yes.
then the HRT is a lot more of a grey area because there are a number of gynecological cancers, a number of blood cancers, as well as breast cancer that can cause menopause through treatment. And HRT isn't always appropriate for those women.
Thank you for clarifying that. And you're 1,000% right. And I appreciate the correction. You're 100% right that um, medical induced menopause is a much harder um, thing to deal with because HRT may not be an
Yeah.
available treatment option. Okay, so what happened next? What was the next step? And again, you're going through all of this trauma and having to manage with chemotherapy, which itself is a debilitating treatment path. And you've got to figure out how are you going to treat these menopausal symptoms?
Yeah. And that is in my situation, being that medically induced estrogen and progesterone positive cancer diagnosis, that is very, very difficult because you are told very clearly right from the get-go, you cannot take HRT. There is an incredible amount of fear that is driven within the conversations around even things like, should you be eating foods that have soy in them? A number of more Eastern medicines, so your herbal medicines, or maybe even some of your more traditional Chinese medicine tinctures and things like that, are all kind of demonized in some ways because they could be promoting the growth of estrogen in your body, and and estrogen is evil and must be avoided at all costs, because I firmly believe that too many women are led to believe that estrogen caused their cancer. So therefore, estrogen is the enemy. It's not true. And we really need to educate our clinicians on changing their language and how this messaging is delivered,
Okay.
because it is causing...
Can you unpack that a little bit? Because this
Yep,
is
sorry.
so profound. What you are saying is so profound, because on the one hand, we're told estrogen is the woman hormone, and everything that happens in a woman's body is because of estrogen. And then we're told, but estrogen causes cancer, and then you have estrogen positive cancer, and we want to remove all estrogen from our body, and we don't want to have any estrogen. And then there's this very weird relationship in the medical community about, is estrogen the good guy or the bad guy? Do we want it? Do we not want it? Do we want it for our bones, heart and brain? Or do we not want it because it causes all those female related cancers? So please unpack this for me, because I know that you have done a lot of investigation in this area.
I have. And look, I do not do this topic justice at all. What I would recommend anybody that's listening that absolutely wants to get to the bottom of this and really truly understand this from an evidence-based perspective is to seek out the book Estrogen Matters by Dr. Avram Blooming. Dr. Blooming is an American oncologist, and he's just light years ahead of everybody else's thinking on this. And it's all researched. It's all evidence-based. He's not just
He really wrote the book.
He
really did write the book.
He really did. And unfortunately, because of the WHI and a whole heap of other things, people have moved away from the research that is sitting there, and it's now not given enough attention. But in my very fundamental description of it, if you have a cancer growing in your body, so a tumor growing in your body, and predominantly for women, that will be most likely in your breasts, that has estrogen, it is sensitive to estrogen and progesterone through its receptors on its cells, then it will use estrogen as fuel to grow. But it wasn't estrogen and it wasn't progesterone that made the cancer tumor grow in the first place. So if you have a body that is completely evidence-free of any type of cancer, then taking estrogen into your body is not going to cause cancer. However, if you had a history of cancer and you knew that you had a tumor, maybe you've been for a mammogram and a lump showed up and you were on HRT, then they would take you off your HRT at that point in time, because if that did turn out to be a tumor with estrogen or progesterone positive markers, then that estrogen could be fueling it. So that's the difference. Yeah. Estrogen didn't cause the tumor. However, you may grow a tumor that will use it as fuel.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
100%.
It's really complicated.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes a lot of sense. And what's interesting about what you're saying, and again, neither you nor I are doctors, and no one should take what we're saying as medical advice or anything like that, but we are both very well entrenched in this field of menopause and hormones. We know, it's interesting what you say, that the tumor itself potentially could have estrogen and or progesterone receptors, which is helping, that those hormones are helping to feed it. But we know that there are estrogen receptors in every single cell of the body. Cell.
Yeah. And that
So
doesn't mean that all of those cells become cancerous.
exactly. And that language, which is used, it's not you using it, it is used in the medical
Mm,
community, that this is a estrogen positive tumor, meaning that estrogen is feeding that cancerous tumor. We know that cancer cells are cells, and we know that every cell in our body is responsive and receptive to estrogen. And it just seems that it seems too easy. It's like 1 + 1 here does may not
mhm.
necessarily equal 2. There's something else going on. Again, I'm not saying that therefore HRT should be advised for every single person who is
No.
diagnosed with an estrogen or progesterone receptive cancer, but we need to be asking questions. And I
Yeah.
don't think we're
And
asking enough questions.
no, and that's, the clinicians asking the questions, the patients asking the questions, and it really comes down to you need to be, we need to be really clear in this conversation, and anybody listening needs to be really clear that every single cancer diagnosis is very, very unique. There are so many nuances and determining factors to every single
Yeah.
cancer diagnosis. And even if we just talk about breast cancer, the breadth of nuance within every single diagnosis is just so different. And
Yeah.
it even comes down to things like, what your personal risk profile is as well. If you are someone that is highly anxious and has, a lot of fear around your health, or you're not, you're just not comfortable with taking risk, then even if a doctor can outline to you a protocol that it would be safe for all the other risks around your diagnosis, that
Yeah.
still might not be enough for you to say, okay, cool, I'm willing to give that a try. It was for
Yeah.
me. I am taking HRT now, but I started taking HRT about 18 months or so ago, if not 2 years ago now. And that was about 6 years past my diagnosis. So I had 6 years of having nothing available to me from a symptom management perspective, to understanding my diagnosis, having multiple conversations with some very, very research-led experts worldwide. I'm very lucky to be in a position to do that. I've read multiple research papers. It took me many, many closed doors to find a GP who would open the door to having the conversation, where we made a joint decision about what was my risk, adversity, and what I was happy to choose to ensure that, from my perspective, I can live my life with the highest quality of life.
Amazing. Amazing. And I think what you're saying is 100% correct, because someone else may, even having done the research and the personalization and speaking to some really informed practitioners, they may come out and say HRT is still not appropriate for me.
Still not for
So,
me. Yeah, and
yeah,
that is
amazing.
absolutely okay.
Yeah.
Absolutely okay. Yeah.
So the big question is then, what happened in those intervening 6 years? What was your life like? How
Oof.
did you navigate this? What was going on? And now that you are, we'll get to the sort of the postscript of the HRT and what's going on, and your availability and what's happening in Australia. But what happened in those intervening 6 years? Where did life take you?
Yeah, it was hard. It was very, very hard. As I said earlier, I was very much playing detective, trying to work out what I could do to manage my symptoms.
Yeah.
I, I'd been in the fitness industry for, now I left the fitness industry a couple of years ago, but I was 12, 13 years when I retired. And so, I was able to play around with a lot of lifestyle interventions that, I knew would, give me the best chance of being able to manage my symptoms. And, it gave me, so I stopped drinking alcohol. That was probably the very, very first really kind of firm decision I made about, look, it was really obvious that when I drank alcohol, I would have a hot flush. If I
Yes.
drank alcohol, I would have a terrible night's sleep. My
Yes.
anxiety would rise. I would feel absolutely rubbish the next day, even if it
Yeah.
was one glass of wine. It was like my tolerance just disappeared to be able to drink alcohol. So
Yes.
stopping alcohol for me was a bit of a no-brainer because it was low-hanging fruit. It was
Yeah.
really obvious what the side effects of that were, how it impacted me. And I was never a huge drinker anyway, so it was an easy one for me to go, you know what, I'm just
Yeah.
parking that. I don't
Yeah.
don't need to do that anymore. It
It's
doesn't
su- it's
serve me
such
well.
a it's such an interesting fix, the no drinking, because we know that alcohol consumption, it is going to, as you said, clearly is related in so many women to hot flushes, night sweats, insomnia, poor sleep, weight gain, increased anxiety. There are so many clear things that alcohol does. But yet, on the flip side, so many women are using that alcohol at the end of the day to
Yeah.
de-stress, to regulate their nervous system. And then it's just a cycle that carries on repeating because they wake up the next day feeling terrible. They've got to pound themselves through the day, get through the day with their coffee and their muffin and their whatever, come to the evening and just need to relax and unwind with that glass of wine. And you've just got to break that cycle because, as you said, for
Yeah.
many women, for some women, it can be a really easy fix to totally breaking out of that symptom cycle.
Yeah, yeah. And here's another really interesting fact when we talk about alcohol and cancer risk. You have a higher risk of developing a breast cancer by
Yeah.
drinking alcohol than you do as a breast cancer survivor. And nobody explained that to
Hey,
me.
say that last sentence. I lost you in that last sentence. You have a higher
Yeah,
risk.
of developing a breast cancer from drinking alcohol than me as a breast cancer survivor taking HRT has.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was
Yeah.
just a no-brainer to me, and we
Yeah.
don't talk about, I've talked about this before and it always blows people away. I'm like, oh yeah, HRT for me was demonized. You cannot take HRT. HRT is, it's off the table. But nobody said, and alcohol is even worse. Whatever you do, don't drink any alcohol. It just doesn't make sense that we can demonize one thing so fiercely and not the other.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
fair.
Yeah. So I'm going to challenge you on that because
Ooh.
I know that you're a big women's health advocate and I know you'll spend a lot of time in the women's health space. Why do you think that women's health conversation really has developed these inappropriate, I say inappropriate or very strange myths around what is okay in women's health and what is not okay in women's health? And we know that HRT has a long history of being demonized. We now know that HRT is being embraced and loved by all in the menopause space. But there is something around this women's health conversation where some things are absolutely blackballed and some things are just not given the right focus, emphasis, or talked about.
Yeah. It's a
Yeah,
really good question. It's a
yeah,
really good question. It's a really obvious question to ask because there is such distinction across, what's deemed to be acceptable and what's not, and what's encouraged and what's not. Um, I think, I think, I think a lot of it is probably going to come down to the fact that history is not on our side. We have not studied women's health until only recently. There was no research done on anything that included a woman's physical body up until the 1990s. All research was done in a scientific setting on healthy, young, white men.
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
so that I think is a huge contributor. And
yeah,
you can then start playing into medical misogyny and the patriarchal control of society, and there's a whole
yeah,
dozen rabbit holes that we can go down there. And I think we are still very much still untangling ourselves from what's right for men, what's right for women, on a physiological, biological level. And I just think there's so much confusion. And there's also things like alcohol and certain foods and behaviors. There's a lot of money being made off them at, government levels, society, there's cultural implications, I don't know, it's really complicated.
yeah.
But they're the things that come to mind for me that really put us in this position where one's okay and one's not.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you totally. So I want to use that as a springboard for you to share with us a little bit about what's been happening in Australia recently, in the menopause space. I know that the
Mhm.
last year, there have been some major developments. So share with us a little bit of what's happened there, what is positive, maybe what's less positive, what sort of how you see the movement changing. I know that there's been a lot of governmental stuff going on now, so just share with us a little bit about where women's health and menopause stand in Australia at the
Yep.
moment.
So, in a much better place than we did 3 years ago when I first started the podcast. That's the good news. We still have a really long way to go.
Yeah.
You know, it's small steps, it's small breakthroughs, it's small wins, but you know, a win is a win, and we're definitely taking lots of really good positive steps forward. So, the first thing that happened that was probably the most significant was that for the first time and I'm not going to say the first time, but I'm going to say indefinitely and a long time, we had the most representation of women in our parliament. So in Australia, we have two houses basically. We have, you know, the Conservatives and the opposition to them. And for the first time, we had the most representation of women in the house that was in power. That was huge. And as a result of that, you know, the topics that were being talked about started to change. The topics that were being driven forward for
Yeah.
consideration and for you know, policy reform were all changing. And for the very first time, the word menopause was uttered on our parliament floor, and a cohort of senators, it was, put together a call for a national Senate inquiry into the impacts of perimenopause and menopause in society. So in the workplace,
Yeah.
in relationships, in the healthcare setting, in, you know, awareness and education, in the schooling system. They really wanted to unpack
Wow.
everything that was happening. So that was the first thing that happened, and that was huge, huge. We finally had a public narrative about menopause that went beyond women bitching about symptoms. You know, it was about the economic impacts, and it was about the career impacts, and it was really great. So that was a process that was a public process. So the public were invited to submit their, you know, and that was everybody across, you know, so there was lived experience stories were called for, clinicians were called to give their side of the stories, workplaces were called to give their side of the stories, you know. It was really great. And that was a
Amazing.
process the whole process took about 12 months from when it was they called for it, it was agreed that it was going to move forward, and then there was the whole process.
Amazing.
And they handed down at the end of that, so about 12 months later, 25 recommendations. That was amazing. So most Senate inquiries you would kind of expect, I think we were kind of expecting maybe 7 to 10
Yeah.
recommendations. We got 25
Wow.
recommendations, and
Wow.
they were all really significant and covered, you know, everything that I've just talked about. You know, they wanted to include, they've asked to include menopause education in the high school curriculum. So if you're doing sex
Wow.
education, it now includes menopause. You know, why did it not in the first place?
Yeah.
You know, addressing what is actually a global gap that exists in the education of our medical practitioners. You know, our GPs go through
Yes.
all of their tertiary education
Yes.
with one teeny tiny, you know, almost like sub paragraph about
Yes. About
menopause. So
menopause.
addressing that, looking at whether workplaces wanted to implement menopause leave, or were there other policy reforms that could be made. You know, it was a really broad sweeping range, and it also included, which I was most excited about, a significant investment in a public awareness raising campaign that would be driven by lived experience. And that was
Amazing.
huge. Yeah, yeah. So that really meant a lot, because that meant that they really did listen to everybody that, you know, submitted their lived
Yeah.
experience, and they took note of that. So that was really huge. So that was probably the first big thing that happened. That created a real groundswell of optimism and hope. You know, some of the quick wins that have come off the back of that are, for the first time at the end of last year, we got the first new HRT, so an estrogen, a progesterone, and it was also included a contraceptive pill called Slinder, were listed on what's our PBS, so our pharmaceutical benefits scheme, which meant that they became significantly cheaper and much more accessible to a broader, broader community, which
Yeah.
is huge. So that was a really big win that came off that. And then we have a group of really passionate activists and advocates. And it's a group that is made up of clinicians. It's made up of people like myself that are lived experience advocates. There's a number of policymakers in there as well. And a huge event was put on at the end of last year, which was called So Hot Right Now. It was
I know, I was
really
so
was.
jealous. I saw it all through my LinkedIn feed. I was so jealous to be there. It looked
It
like
was
the
so
event,
wonderful. So
like the menopause event globally. It was like, oh my
it really
gosh,
was.
I just want to
And it
fly
was
over
one of
to
my
Australia.
I know. It was one of my very good friends who happens to also be my amazing GP, who was one of the amazing women that made this happen and put it on. So for anybody that doesn't know, the So Hot Right Now, it ended up being a weekend of events. So, but the big pinnacle event was at the Sydney Opera House, like the most iconic building in Australia. I think there was 3,000 women in the room. And on stage, we had Dr. Louise Newson, we had Dr. Kelly Casperson from the US, Dr. Mary Claire Haver from the US, Dr. Vonda Wright from the US, but we also had our own amazing local experts as well. Professor Jayashri Kulkarni spoke about menopause and depression and mental health implications, and it was a 3-hour event, I think, and it was just incredible. I did this. I was very lucky. I was in one of the front rows, and at the end, it was a standing ovation. The entire venue just rose to their feet and applauded. And I've got this video that went up on my Instagram. It's one of my most viewed reels ever. And I just literally spun around and filmed the entire venue clapping. And the energy and the vibe in the room was like nothing. I've been to that venue. I'm lucky enough to have been there so many times for different concerts and events, and but this was like a whole new level. And it was just beyond the information that was delivered. It was just so amazing to have all these women in a room, all connected and connecting, and it was just magic. It really was. So we've been very lucky.
So practically, and I know you've also spoken about this on your podcast about the availability of HRT for women who want it in Australia. Practically, obviously the hype is amazing, and obviously open up the conversation. And now that this is especially governmentally sort of approved conversations, but practically, what do you see changing for the regular Australian woman on the street?
Yeah, sure. So the biggest things were, I think the fact that it is absolutely a part of the community narrative. It's not a conversation that's being held, behind closed doors or behind hushed hands or, under the rug. We've well and truly pulled up that rug. It is not going back down. Menopause is talked about now very loudly, very clearly, in all halls of power and on the street, which is wonderful. That within itself is huge. As I mentioned, making HRT more accessible from a financial perspective for those that want to take it. That's been huge. We have, Australia is lucky enough to have the only female formulated testosterone in the world called Androfem.
Unbelievable.
But unfortunately, it is unbelievable. But unfortunately, because it's not on our pharmaceutical benefit scheme, it's very, very expensive. So I take testosterone, but I choose to take a male's formulation of testosterone, because it's cheaper, because it is on the PBS. I have to apportion that out every day to make sure I'm not overdosing myself. So there has to be some semblance of self-management and control over that. But we have a very, very large push at the moment, and we're hoping that at the end of July that it will be listed as being up for discussion to be included on our PBS. So that will make a significant difference.
I think I heard on one of your episodes on your podcast that in Australia there are maybe 9 approved male
Men's.
testosterone
Yep.
options and the
Yep.
one approved for females, right?
No, none approved for female.
The no, but the testosterone that is available for females.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so we have the only worldwide
Yeah,
female formulated testosterone,
yeah,
and it is not listed on our
yeah,
PBS, but 9 male
yeah,
testosterone formulations are on our PBS.
yeah,
So there's
yeah,
that,
yeah,
massive imbalance happening there.
yeah,
The other
yeah,
thing that is happening that is exciting, but and it is being driven by a desire to fix the patch shortages, and that is there is an amazing Australian woman and a couple of a cohort that are in the throes of seeking funding to develop an Australian designed patch and hopefully as well an Australian produced patch for estrogen, which would just solve all of those the estrogen supply issues that are a global problem, but
yeah,
Australia is a lot more isolated from the rest of the world, so we do tend to get everything last.
yeah.
Yeah, so that is a big problem at the moment for those that are taking HRT, is actually the accessibility of patches to
Right.
start with. So there is a little cohort that's working to actually change that as well.
Yeah. So you've used this phrase a lot, lived experience, and I know that you are, for want of a better word, a lived experience advocate, and you really talk about that. So can you just unpack that a little bit for us, and also maybe within that conversation talk about the women who want to go down a non-HRT route for whatever
Indeed.
reason?
Yeah.
Sort
Yeah.
of what are you seeing in those lived experiences? I know, again, on your podcast you talk a lot about this, and really collecting and hearing these stories of women. So share with us a little bit about that, because I think it's a really interesting direction that I think women's health needs to be going in more.
Yeah, I agree very much. And it's interesting. I started my podcast 3 years ago, really because I could see that there was this gap that existed for women from an awareness perspective, from a knowing where to get information perspective. And so I knew instinctively, it's something I've always done, that when I shared my story, it helped other people. So it was very much just about, sharing my story in the hope that I could help other people, finding the information that I knew had helped me, and then getting the people that I sought help from to share that information with others. So that was kind of how I started, speaking my story and seeing the difference that that made to women. I then, over time started getting approached by media and things like that to use, to add my lived experience voice to different headlines and to different situations that were arising in the media as the conversation was growing. And I realized that there was so much power in adding a lived experience story to, wanting to talk about lost funds through superannuation because of menopause and things like that. So
Yeah.
that's when I really started to realize that the power of sharing lived experience didn't lie just within the difference that it made for the woman that I was having a one-on-one conversation with, but it also went much broader than that it could impact politics, and it could impact workplaces, and financial decisions and the economy and that sort of thing. So the other thing that I realized as well was that women have not been very good about talking about their own health with anyone, really.
Yeah.
We don't talk growing up, we didn't, and now this is a great theme to tie in with your podcast theme. As a young woman growing up, I didn't talk to anyone else about what my periods were like.
Yeah.
I didn't know if my period was heavy, if my period was light, if it was regular. All I knew was what I knew. And because we don't speak about that, we then don't have an understanding of what's not normal. So therefore, we don't know when to go and seek help. My gynecologist, who I've had on the show to talk about heavy menstrual bleeding, is this real force to be reckoned with at the moment, wanting to change how much women know about what is heavy menstrual bleeding versus what you think is normal menstrual bleeding, because there's a huge amount of disinformation and misunderstanding out there. And, she tells me horrendous stories of women that, are wearing a super tampon and a heavy pad and period underwear, and they're still bleeding down their leg if they haven't gone and changed all of those in an hour. And they don't know that that's not normal because they just haven't spoken about it. And that's where I see lived experience being so powerful, when we can all accept that we don't know what we don't know, but then we're also open to sharing what we do know. You can start pulling in pieces, even if you don't sit there and say openly, oh my God, I had no idea that what I've been experiencing isn't what everyone else in the room has been experiencing.
Yeah.
Even if it's just a penny drop moment for someone that makes them realize that they should seek help, or even on the flip side of that, that actually they're okay. Maybe they thought there was something wrong and there actually isn't something wrong, because the way they feel is the same way everyone else feels.
Yeah.
That can be just as empowering as well. So lived experience to me is incredibly powerful. It's incredibly important. And I firmly believe that there is a much bigger place in healthcare, and the decision making around healthcare is delivered and how it is educated, that includes lived experience.
Yeah. I think everything you're saying is fascinating. And I think there really are actually two sides to sharing this lived experience. The first side is for the women, for women's circles, and for women who are sharing these stories, that they know they're not alone. But that lived experience, as you just said, can actually inform medical, like the healthcare approach, the way that the practitioners engage with women. Because if they realize that women are actually, not textbook, they're not going to follow the textbook examples of what they've learned, if they've even learned anything about women's health, but the lived experience can inform how the healthcare system actually responds to women. That's super, super powerful.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah.
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 Wow. Well, I know that we could carry on talking for ages and ages. And you have you've got so much wealth of information to share with us. Is there anything, as we sort of begin to close up, that you want to just share about your experience, what's going on in Australia, anything that, that women really need to, that women really need to know about what's going on?
I think that, the two pieces of advice that I always, always want to leave anyone with after they've had a conversation with me or listened to a conversation with me is to know that your experience is going to be quite likely completely different to this experience of your sister even, or your mum, or your best friend, or your work colleague, or even listening to me on a podcast. Every single one of us is going to have an extremely unique transition through menopause, through our midlife years, for, all of our health kind of areas. And it's really important to understand that even if you hear somebody talking about, what can sound like doom and gloom at times when we roll out all the symptoms and the severity of some of those, don't fall into the trap of thinking that because they experienced that was what you're going to experience, and then start developing some fear and anxiety around what might come. Because like we said right at the very beginning, I was 47 and I had no symptoms whatsoever. And I may well have been one of those lucky 20% that just sailed through. We'll never know, but that could be you too. So don't expect that because we talk about menopause more now, that it means that menopause will be significantly debilitating or chaotic for you. The second thing that is a part of that is your body better than anybody else, and that includes your doctor. So trust your gut. Always trust your instincts. If something doesn't feel right, if something feels off, if you go and have a conversation with someone and you feel dismissed or not heard, you don't have to accept that. If you walk away and there's something that is just making you feel that you just didn't get to the bottom of what you went in there to get to the bottom of, go and ask for a second opinion. Go and have a third opinion. Don't stop asking questions until you are confident and that little niggle in your gut has been listened to, because that is more important than anything.
Yeah, we talk about this often on this podcast, that there's an element of like we feel guilty or we feel bad, like we're going to hurt our doctor's feelings if we go and look for a second
Mm-hmm.
opinion. And there's again tied up to that the way that we engage, that women interact with the healthcare system, there's that element of like, well, that's what that doctor said, and I don't feel bad if I go find another second opinion. And yeah, it's really complicated. So amazing. Thank you. As we close, I end my podcast asking every guest the same question. This is a podcast about the things that I want my daughters to know. What do you want your daughters, goddaughters, nieces, that next generation of women, what do you want them to know? Based on all the experience that we are, really learning by trial and error.
Oh, this is such a big question. And it's a really interesting question for me because I don't have daughters. I have two sons. But I'm lucky enough to have two, young men really. And they have girlfriends and they have friends. And I put a lot of my kind of lens over what I would want them to know, what I really, and I talk a lot about one of my biggest drivers is that making sure that the generations coming behind us don't have to go into this blindly, that women's health isn't this taboo topic that we don't talk about. Like, talk to your friends about what your periods are like. If you are having a rough day, whether it's your mental health, whether it's your physical health, ask, talk, be open, seek out people that will listen to you and reach out when things just don't seem right, because nobody should have to go through anything alone. We should always be, and one of the things, I find this really fascinating. Women are incredible. We are so great at looking after each other and nurturing each other. And, if you got a call today to say that your friend had, fallen ill overnight and was really sick, you'd probably, if you're like me, be down at her place, dropping a meal at the door, checking in. What can I do? Do you want me to do the load of washing? Whatever. But we won't ask for that help when we need it. There's this real dichotomy there that's just incongruent, and it's a real shame. So my biggest piece of advice is don't forget to ask for help when you need it. Always reach out and ask.
I think that's so important. And I think that our next generation of girls are going to benefit because there is so much information out there now. There are so many informed and educated women. There are so many lived experiences that are being shared, and they don't need to be in the dark anymore that maybe we were when we were their age.
100%. Yeah, you said that so much better than I did.
Oh, I'm just reframing your words. That's it. Well, Sonya, this has been amazing. Tell us where people can reach you, where people can listen to you. I know you're working on a new project also. So how can people find you?
Yeah, sure. So on Instagram is the most active place that I am, and my account there is just my name, Sonya Lovell, SonyaLovell. So you can find me there. I have the podcast is Dear Menopause. It's available on any platform that you could possibly listen to a podcast on. There is also a website for that as well. And yeah, my Instagram links in my bio will lead you to everywhere, literally, that you could connect with me. I answer my own DMs. I do not have a team of people. If you send me an email, it will be me that replies. I'm very generous with my time. I love hearing from women that either need support or just want to share their stories with me. So yeah, please reach out if you've listened. And thank you so much for having me today.
Yeah, this has been amazing. This has been so fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Sonia, for joining me. Thank you, everyone, for listening. You can watch us on YouTube. You can listen to us also on all the platforms. And I look forward to bringing another episode of the Things I Want My Daughters to Know podcast to you very soon. Have a great day, everyone.